So welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. This is going to be an interactive engagement that we're going to have with you that's going to require you to dialogue in ways that maybe your courts don't. As Nicole said, I'm John Lang, J. Lang Consulting. What it didn't say is I spent 2 years as a consultant with the Massachusetts Trial Court looking to change the culture, and then 8 years after that as the Chief Experience and Diversity Officer. I've built many tools that work in courts, that have been effective in courts, and these are some tools that we use at very different levels and stages of our courts to make sure that we had the engagement and dialogue that we were looking for. And Credell has just been a great partner in doing this work.
Yes, so I work at the Philadelphia Court as the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, and I look to make workplaces inclusive. That means working with people, getting to know them when you're managing individuals, making sure that they have proper training, and treating everyone with respect and dignity, because that's at the heart of this work.
So many of you have heard DEI as acronyms being really pretty much politicized. And diversity, equity, and inclusion are not political. They're core to the functioning of all of our courts. Diversity is important. Diversity isn't one thing, and it's not just about this idea of hiring unqualified people to increase demographics within a court system. It goes way beyond that. And so this session will allow us to talk more broadly around what diversity, equity, inclusion means.
Absolutely.
So I am going to ask you, this is being recorded right now. What I'm going to ask, particularly for our first exercise, which you all will be working in groups, and I'd like 4, no more than 5, if you could get around each other to do this after we give you the instructions. It'll be really important for us to hear some of those dialogues. Out of the 4 or 5 people, I'd like one person to be a reporter for that group. And the reporter's job is not to sit back and listen to everyone and just hear what they're saying so that they can report it out. The reporter's job is to provide dialogue, insight, perspective to those conversations as well, and then share what the collective response of the group was. You may want to take notes. If you do take notes to be able to communicate that back, I'd ask you to not put attributions, nobody's names, attached to anything that they're saying. And even when you're reporting out, what I'm going to ask you to do is report out on behalf of the group, not identify any individual as a contributor to the comments that you may be sharing. All right? If any individual wants to share their own personal thoughts or whatever, that's totally fine. But for the sake of these exercises, we're going to ask you to report out as a collective and not attribute any comments to any particular individual. First exercises we're going to do is the dimensions of diversity. And the prompts here are, when you think of yourself in these dimensions of your diversity, which 2 or 3 identities do you think of most often, think of least often? Which of these identities has the strongest impact how other people see you as a person? And then which of these identities has given you the most privilege and the least privilege? So we're going to leave this up while you're doing the exercise so that you can refer to it. And Credell is just going to walk us through his perspective on these questions.
I want everyone to keep in mind there are no right or wrong answers to this. This is just discussing your perspective with each other. And when you look at a diversity wheel, we're not always talking about race and gender. Diversity is a very complex concept, and here is a diversity wheel. So if you see right here at the core is the personality. So just by show of hands, how many people in this room would describe themselves as an extrovert? You get in a room, you like talking. That's me. Sometimes I can't be quiet, right? How many people would describe themselves as an introvert? Excellent. Here's the thing. Whether you're introvert, extrovert, it doesn't mean one has better ideas. So for example, if you're a manager and you're managing staff, you should have an understanding on first, are my direct reports introverts? Are they extroverts? What are their working styles? You know, when people think about diversity, it's not about jumping to immediately go into race and gender. You want to focus on at who is the core, who is this individual? Now you have the internal dimensions. That's when you see things that are more observable. Race, culture, ethnicity, gender identity, expression, religion, sexual orientation, physical abilities, neurodiversity. So when you think about neurodiversity, just people have different ways of thinking. Sometimes these internal dimensions are observable, sometimes they are not. Then you have the external dimensions, education level, work experience. Even when you think about a court, you know, the differences between someone working in family court versus if you're working in the criminal division. We're gonna go to the organizational dimensions. Do you have a union? What's your seniority, your work location? So there's many dimensions of diversity. So when you think about these questions, you're thinking about yourself, but you're also thinking about yourself as a professional in the courts. And I want you to think about all of these things. And one of the reasons that we do this exercise is so you get a good understanding of when we say the word diversity, what it entails. Because I could literally have a twin sibling standing right next to me and our wheels could look completely different. And so when we are addressing individuals or somebody walks up to us and we just look at them, we don't know what this whole wheel looks like, even if those two individuals look exactly the same. And so that's part of the reason why we want you to have this dialogue, this discussion with each other. But keep in mind, there's no right or wrong answers. Share whatever you're comfortable sharing. Offer grace to individuals because we all have different perspectives. Diversity is not about saying, hey, we should all agree on all of the same things, but being respectful to one another's opinion and have an understanding of a diversity of experiences is oftentimes helpful. And so exercises like this help us think a little bit outside of the box of what we normally think diversity is, and it includes everything, a more holistic view. And if you've managed anyone, you know this to be true. There's different family concerns, people needing days off, times off, depending on disabilities, if they have to take care of folks. There's a lot that goes into it. And so think about this through the lens of a court setting, because part of these exercises, we want you to be able to take it back to your judiciary, and hopefully it can help you in your management or dealings with individuals. And so we're gonna have everybody just break up into groups of
4 or 5. And again, one person needs to immediately be identified as the reporter of the group. You'll each walk through these wheels and these answers.
I can hear you fine, but someone said can't hear the speaker wearing the glasses. I can hear you perfectly.
But testing for the live stream. Live stream testing, just doing a test for the live stream.
All right. So I'm just going to walk through this again, just to help with clarity. So we have our inner dimensions, which are age, cultural ethnicity, gender identity and expression, religion, spiritual beliefs, non-religious, sex, sexual identity, sexual orientation, physical neurodiversity abilities, racial identity, age. So those are your inner dimensions. Those may not be the ones that you think about most, particularly in a professional setting. External dimensions are your education, political ideologies, family, parental status, geographic location, national origin, personal habits, recreational habits, language, communication and skills, marital relationship, married or single, income, socioeconomics, appearance, work experience, education, political ideologies, if I didn't say that. Organizational dimensions are your work content, your department, unit group, your seniority, work location, union affiliation, management status. If I were to go through this, I'll just give you one example. The thing that I think of most often, I would have to say, is my racial identity. I would also say, if I were doing 2 or 3 of those, I would also say abilities included in that. 10 years ago, I wouldn't have done that, but I had a stroke 3 years ago. And so I'm constantly thinking about my ability to move around, speak, communicate effectively, and otherwise. Things that I think of least often are my income levels or recreational habits. Those aren't things that really come to my mind on an everyday basis. Which identities has the strongest impact on how others see you? I can tell you when I worked for the Massachusetts Trial Court, we have 100 court locations. Whenever I would visit a court, I'm that guy from Boston. You know, no one until they got to know me understood what I was about or what I was trying to do for the system. They had to look beyond the appearance. Which of the identities give you the most privilege and the least privilege? So in terms of the most privilege, I would say my work experience gives me a ton of privilege. The things that gives me the least privilege, I would actually say would be my race again, particularly in this current environment. So that's what the exercise that we want you all to go through and share with each other. Do it as succinctly as possible because, again, we want to hear some of the feedback. What we will find and what you'll see through the process is we're going to hear very different things from very different groups of people. So we just want to explore that.
I have one from the chat.
Yes.
Okay. So she says what she thinks of often is education, recreation, habits, and marriage. What she thinks of less often is age and race. However, except now in the frame of being a person of privilege and how I need to remember that and be respectful to those who are not. Her third would be her language skills. And then the final is that she's a white woman who looks straight.
Thank you. Thank you. Continue to stay engaged. We'd like to hear your other perspectives as we move on. All right, so we're going to give you 10 minutes to go through this amongst each other. Okay, everyone, if you could wrap up your conversations, and I'd like to draw your attention back up to the front. Yeah. All right. So the wonderful thing for Creedell and I is we're seeing you go through this exercise is everyone's contributing to the conversation. Everyone individually has voice. Everyone individually has identity. Everyone individually is seen a particular way or doesn't want to be seen a particular way because of some aspect of those identities. So everyone contribute, and we can learn from each other and about each other in ways that if we don't have these conversations, it makes it difficult. Creedell talked about earlier this idea of getting to know who your staff members are. If family is important to someone, it's really important that you understand the importance of family to one of your colleagues or your employees. If abilities is really important, if religion is really important, it's important that you understand that from the perspective of an individual, how you might be impacting them. But also it's how do you show up to work every day? And how do you show people what's important to you? And how do they value you as an individual as a result of that? So we're going to ask for volunteers in terms of reporters to share out. And by all means, again, I know everyone's aware, but without attribution.
Hi. So one of the things that we talked a lot about initially was how different these attributes can be in our professional life versus our private life.
Yes.
But considering within the court system, one of the repeated things that we talked about was our management status. We were all managers. And so we all talked about how we are aware of that. And having, different conversations depending on who is in the room at that point and getting different opinions at that point. And interestingly enough, one of the least things that we thought about was the income. And I think that also comes from a privilege standpoint as well. Along with some of the other things, we talked about gender and race as different things that we are aware of and possibly that we perceive others seeing us as, and also talking a little bit about those generational differences for sure.
Were there any aha moments in your group?
Yes, and I wish I wrote it down.
Okay.
Yeah, I should have written it down, but there was some very good just back and forth and some, especially those experiences that we were sharing regarding, we were talking about union affiliations and things like that, and just there's lines drawn in the sand where we as managers and for the most part non-represented folks were having separate experiences.
Yes. Excellent. Thank you very much.
And I like that you are all of you are managers, because as managers, you have to strike a balance. So having an understanding of family being important to someone or disability or something like that, you also have to strike a balance of making sure that you're not giving certain employees additional treatment. And the other employees are looking and saying, oh, wait a minute, are showing favoritism? But also you want to be fair. And so you are in a very serious position where you have to consider all these factors. Another theme that you touched on was the transparency. There are some things that you talk to your staff about on a need-to-know basis, and there are other things that you have your supervisors that you have to report to. And so it's challenging, but doable. And I think these conversations help.
Next group.
So some of the things that we talked about in our group, as far as the things that we think about most often, we had some common threads. As far as appearance and language communication, making that first appearance, what people's perception is, of you, keeping that in mind. Also, age and education. So whether or not whether there's a difference between you and your peers, perhaps with age or education, those are some other things that that were common threads. Things that we thought of least often anyway, were things like sexual identity, gender identity. Those are the common threads there. In terms of this, what we believe had the strongest impact on how others view a person, appearance was through all of our answers, language and communication as well. Again, the impression that you make and how you present yourself to other people. I think as managers, I think that makes sense because we always want to make sure that we are carrying ourselves in that sense. Most privilege, we had some differing answers there, but for most privilege or identities that have given you the most privilege, education. We also talked about it in the sense of least privilege. If maybe you're not as on the same education level as some of your peers, so that may not be something that's that's a benefit to you. So yeah, but we had some aha moments. I think at the end we had a discussion about gender roles and how they can play a role as well. If you're very front facing, you may, for example, if you deal with vexatious litigants, things like that, your gender may play a role in how those litigants address you, or versus if they address fellow staff from a different gender. Yeah.
Excellent.
Thanks for sharing that. And so you spoke a lot about appearances, and when we think about different types of bias, there's a type of bias, especially as you're dealing with the court users or folks coming in, or even your colleagues, affinity bias. Sometimes we're more likely to relate to people that appear similar to us, but it could also be something that we like about that person, like this person is well dressed, or I like the way that they're talking. So you can imagine someone coming into your courthouse, let's say it's a self-represented litigant, they're dressed very nice, well put together, the form is filled out correctly, you're smiling, they're smiling, everything's great. Okay, well, the person behind them, they're walking up, the paperwork is halfway complete. Now you're kind of like, but when you change your level of service, you may not even be doing that on purpose, because sometimes we naturally have that, affinity bias where we can just sort of mimic the person. You're not doing it on purpose, but that other person doesn't know that. And so sometimes we do have to be cautious of appearances and how we're treating people. To the same token, I've also heard in professional development, dress the part. So sometimes you want to make sure you're appearing your part, especially as you're moving up the chain of command. And so it's a balancing act. On the one hand, you're using this thing, but on the other hand, you want to make sure you're not misjudging those individuals that are coming into the courthouse, as well as individuals that you're working with. Because when you think about, I know your group mentioned income, but when you think about income, some people can have the same income, but they have different disposable income. Right? So when we look a little bit deeper into that, that can even change how you're appearing when you come to the courthouse, whether you are a colleague or an individual using the court. So we always want to keep that in mind. Some people may come to the courthouse and not even have enough money to pay for parking while they're trying to fill out their paperwork. So we always want to keep the experiences of not only our colleagues, but also the court users coming in. Thank you for sharing that.
Okay, so with our group, in terms of what folks thought about most, management status, education, and family were things that were mentioned in a number of occasions. We had a variety of ideas about what we thought of least, though two people actually mentioned recreation, so I guess we need to get out to Planet Fitness more often, I think. In terms of what gives us most privilege, which was mentioned, work experience, institutional knowledge, and education, and what people thought of in terms of their identity that impacted them when other people see them. their management status, their work experience, and their education. So,
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I think that's very important when you think about being at the courthouse, your work experience, how long you've been there, how well you understand the acronyms. When you think about, are you an attorney? I'm an attorney, so oftentimes people just assume that I know what I'm talking about working at the court. I don't always know everything. I've learned a lot from people that have worked at the courts much longer than I have. But it's all about perceptions. And so it's important that you share that. But working at the courthouse for a certain period of time really can be an advantage to you.
I think we have one or two groups left in the back.
So we talked about a few different things. One thing that I thought was pretty interesting with one of our group members was she was talking about how her sex was one identity that she thought of the most, but it was actually one of the least privileged ones, depending on like her superior at the time may have not have liked that. Something that I also agreed with was having the socioeconomic being one of the strongest impact for some of us. Some of us may be able to take like a risky career move, and that career move may not work out in the end. So we kind of always potentially have like our parents to fall back on, for example, whereas somebody who doesn't have that socioeconomic support, they straight up might be homeless, like if they moved to a new city, for example, and lost that job prospect. Me personally, I actually saw my geographic location as one of the strongest identities that I identified with. We're from Las Vegas, but I actually see myself as the outlier in my court because I'm not from Las Vegas. I came from a different state, which had a slightly different criminal justice system. So I see that as an advantage. And I think, at least my perception, some of my colleagues, I think, kind of tap into my brain, get a different perspective on just how I used to work in a different state.
Well, they want you to.
Geographic location, I'm thinking about transferable skill sets. So transferable skill sets can come from outside the court, but it can also come from other courthouses. Another important reason that we come to conferences like this, you know, with NACM, you're meeting people from different counties, and sometimes we share very similar issues, and maybe we can have some solutions that go around. But as we're relating to people, oftentimes it can be easy to forget these things when we're in work and we're trying to get everything done and be efficient, because this takes some time, you know, when you have to think about the various identities and perspectives and also perceptions. Sometimes what we perceive is not always true. Sometimes what others perceive about us is not always true, but it's important to keep this in mind in our dealings with individuals.
And that things do change over time. And if I value these things about myself and other people don't see that in me, how do they get to value those? If I value these things and a court user comes in and I don't see them valuing appearance the way that I value appearance, how does that impact my interaction with them? So thank you for that one. We're going to move on. Oh, okay, please.
Okay, so for the both of us back here, what we think of most often was education and our family, just because from where we come from up north with the Navajo Nation tribe, we, what's the term? Family is very important for us. And so we branch out it's how we communicate with our community members. And education is very important for us in terms of learning and trying to understand different communities with what we work with. And I think the least often that we think about was our geographic location. I know that should be the biggest part since we're so away from all other courts. But that seemed to be something we were at least I was not something I thought about often. And then another thing was just appearance for me. I don't really think about that. I just try to really get to know the person and where they come from. So I guess their background was something I looked more at towards.
And I really appreciate you for sharing that because we're seeing some differences in the answers. We had some groups where appearance and geographic location were some of the most thought about. And in your group, it was the least thought about, but then education and family was the most valued. And these are things that people generally do value at some point. It just depends on how we prioritize those things. But oftentimes, the more education that you have in the court system or in any workplace, sometimes it is easier for you to advance, and sometimes it can provide certain benefits knowing about a particular subject matter.
Do you find that with doing this activity, it's difficult for people who are answering the questions to separate what they feel personally versus professionally? The reason why I'm asking is because if I was thinking about this professionally, I don't know if family would be something that I would think about, or if my geographic location would be something that I think about versus my education and my skill set, my experience. Do you feel like generally when you have these conversations, it's a bridge or a combination of both personal and professional, and that is where you see the differences in the group versus it just being strictly professional?
This is a very good question.
So what I would say is that people find it very hard to disassociate who they are as an individual from what they do at work. So you will always see a combination of the two. All right, thank you very much. We're going to move on. You're going to need your phones for this one. So once you understand and appreciate other people's cultural backgrounds, you can connect with them more. If you don't understand who people are, it'll be difficult for you to connect. So we're going to ask you to take a picture of this, and it's going to bring you to a Mentimeter where you're going to answer the question that's there. There should have been some other language up there, but as soon as you capture them, you'll see the language, and I'll move the slide along. Is anybody still taking the picture? All right, wonderful. So the prompt is, I fear that because I am, and you can list any aspect of your identity, that I will blank. So you can just put your identity and the remaining, or that I will, and complete the sentence. I fear that because I am a black man, that I will be considered less qualified than my counterparts. So you fill that out however you choose to, whatever identity that you would like to use. And I'm going to read these as you are prompting, and this is all anonymous. I fear that because I am a woman, that I will not have any rights in the U.S. soon. I feel that because I am a Hispanic woman, that I will be assumed as unqualified. I fear that as a liberal, that I will be threatened. I fear that I am not as well educated and I'll be passed over for future positions. I fear that because I am a woman that I'll be taken less seriously than my male colleagues. I fear that because I am Black, I will be judged differently. I fear that because I am a woman, that I will be considered less qualified. Because I'm a woman, I will never move up the ladder. I fear that because I am Black, that I will be assumed less qualified. I fear that because I am young, I will not be taken seriously by Does that move?
No, I don't think it.
So I fear that because I am an older Black woman, I will not be looked at as the same as my counterparts. I fear that because I choose to be single, that I will be judged as having something wrong with me. And there are more responses to that. So let's think about that. I know that many times that, particularly at work, and talking about issues of identity, that people have a hard time communicating because they don't want to find themselves in a position of being judged because of these fears. But if we don't know what the fears are, if we don't know what the climate is, then how do we actually impact the culture of our courts where these things are actually discussable? So particularly in leadership training, we ask this question of our leaders because they are responsible for the culture and climate of our courts. And if they fear saying something, I had one of our chief justices who said, I fear that because I'm a white man, that if I say something wrong, I will be considered a racist. Now, it just so happened that he shared with me what he said. It was anonymous, but he shared with me what he said. And my question to him is, when issues of race come up in the court and you say nothing, how do you think people see you? As a racist. Because how can you tolerate these things going on? So his objective in not communicating didn't get the outcome that he was looking for. So we want to actually expose these things. We want to bring it out. We don't need to know who it's coming from. We just need to know that these are the things that are consciously in people's minds as they go about work every day. And then we can coach people into conversations that they wouldn't be as comfortable before. And the idea is not to have somebody speak up and say, oh yeah, you said the wrong thing, so therefore you are this. It's to open conversation in such a way that you can say, hey, do you know what you just said impacted me in this way? And I understand that you may not feel comfortable with this, but I want you to know the impact so that you can be careful about it the next time. I want you to say what you have to say, but I want you to know that when you say it in certain ways, and sometimes people will say as a preface, I'm not really sure how to say this, but that's okay. Create environments where you can actually have conversations about what impacts your organizations, your courts the most. And how do these affect the ways that you show up at work every day and how others address issues of race, gender, and other identities in your workplace? If they're not comfortable, they're not going to address those things. I was sharing with Credell earlier before we came in here that we had a particular case where and this is the most extreme case, where someone used the N-word in our court. And because people are afraid of having those conversations, they thought, well, maybe we should just ignore it than address it. Because if we start talking about this is going to bring up other issues. As a court system, when we talk about public trust and confidence, perception is the same as reality. And people will never have trust in the courts if we can't address these issues effectively. And when we talk about public trust and confidence, if people within our court system don't even have trust and confidence in the court system, how does that impact the people who walk through our doors every single day? How do we address the mistreatment? How do we address when someone refuses to use someone's pronouns? How do we make these such conversations that our fear about it or our lack of understanding? Let's say that, because when we don't understand something enough, maybe we have fears about it. How do we educate ourselves when the court system isn't educating us so that we can live up to the values that we have for ourselves, rather than having to be taught by someone else that these are the ways that we need to treat people respectfully, with dignity? Because everything we do impacts the administration of justice. Everything. And it doesn't take the entire system to fail for those perceptions and experiences to become real and prevalent across our system. I could screw up, and everyone will see my court as my screw up. So what we do is important every day, and we need to be able to communicate these fears in such a way that allows us to have the conversations that we need to have. And we never have to out the person that says this. We can always do this anonymously, but we know what the climate looks like. We know what people are struggling with so that culturally we can address these issues effectively for our court.
Thank you, John. Another ad that I'll have, especially for our court managers or anyone who is responsible for writing, let's say, written evaluations. So even though I work in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I take studies, I participate in training, we still all have some level of bias. That's just true. Nothing to be shamed about, but we have to make sure that we're not acting on those things. So for example, let's say you have a staff and you have gender diversity, racial diversity, diversity in age, experiences, and you're constantly filling out annual evaluations. Go back and look at those. Look at those evaluations and make sure that you're truly seeing that individual and you're not adding things about, you may not write the word gender, but that you're not using certain language when you, let's say you rate women, or you rate someone at a certain age level, you're using certain verbs to describe them. Go back and self-audit yourself, because sometimes these things operate outside of our control and what we're actually thinking. And I used some examples based on what people put in the naming fears, which is why I specifically used race, gender, and age, because these are things that people think about. And we want to make sure that we're being fair. Now, again, if someone isn't delivering, they're just not delivering. I'm definitely not suggesting going back, looking at things just to make changes, feeling sorry for someone, but just self-auditing yourself to make sure that you are being fair. And this is something that I do in my written material and language, just to make sure that I'm on track and that I'm being fair. The second way to make sure you're doing that is when you really get to know those individuals, you know their work product, and you're taking copious notes in terms of what they're delivering, you can really rate them and evaluate them on that. And I focused on evaluation specifically because some of these answers spoke about qualifications and climbing the ladder, and those evaluations are like a big piece of that, as we all know, and then it's the reputation. And so that's just something I challenge everyone with. And if you go back and you notice oh, wow, okay, maybe I can improve, just do that. But it's not, we don't do these exercises for the purpose of you come in the room and you feel bad. No, that's not the point. This is all about professional development. And that's why I use myself as an example to show that this is something that everybody can do. It doesn't matter how hard you're working in the diversity space or how well you think that you treat people fairly. We all have to self-audit, and that can be a very helpful and powerful tool. And then, honestly, it'll help you have better one-on-one conversations when you're trying to help your staff improve. You'll really know, hey, this is where you went wrong on some of these things. Here's the record. So you're self-auditing, but it makes you a stronger and more robust manager. And just knowing that you're being fair to folks just feels good at the end of the day.
So all of these exercises are about perspective taking and self-reflection. Nothing is about judgment. And at the point in which you engage in judgment as it relates to somebody communicating, all communication ends. People become defensive, that's not what I meant, and they don't engage. This is about reflection, perspective, and having the conversations that are crucial for courts to have. They've always been crucial for us to have. Anything else? We want to finish this last exercise so that we can have some time to talk if you would like to. The next exercise, we're going to actually need you to write on a piece of paper. So if you have it, great. If you don't have it, there's a couple of pads. We can rip you off a piece of paper in the back and hand it out to you. So raise your hand if you need a sheet of paper, and raise your hand if you need a pen to go with that sheet of paper. No. Nothing gets handed in. This is just for you.
Yeah. You got some extra pens too.
Perspective taking and self-reflection. If you handed them in, we would be reflecting. Anybody else need a sheet of paper?
I gave Nicole some.
Yeah, here. Oh. Someone need a pen? All right, excellent. So 9 columns and 5 rows. If you do it wrong, you can always turn your paper a different, way and it'll work out. All right. So while you're drawing your patterns here, what I want you to think about is your 5 most trusted relationships. But they can't be family members. They're people that you chose to have a trusted relationship with. There's someone that you would tell your most intimate secrets to. 5 trusted, it was 10, we condensed it to 5, so appreciate that. Outside of your family, it has to be someone that you chose to have a relationship with. Yeah. Sure, you can include your spouse. No. So the first column that you will be using is the name of the person. First column, the name of the 5 people. And it's okay if you don't have 5 trusted relationships. Don't overthink that. Just as many as you can, up to 5. You're just putting their initials or something just so that you know who they are. No one else is looking at this sheet of paper other than you.
This activity is really is making people work. You think you have trusted people until you put on a spot and you have to come up with 5 names.
So it's very interesting, and I'll get to it now while people are doing this. So where you are is just where you are. If you have this huge circle of friends that you trust, wonderful, that's a fabulous thing. If you don't, there may be some reason that you don't have trusted relationships. And that's important too, because you're learning from all of this. There's something about you, there's something about other people that allow you to gain perspective and reflect as we go through this exercise. And if you don't have trusted relationships that aren't, biological or familial, how does that impact how you show up at work every day? There's this thing about me that is most intimate me, and I need you to know so that you know who I am. But I don't trust sharing this information. There's very few people that I would circulate that information with. And even though you're my boss, you're not one of them. So on the next line, next to their name, identify their gender. In the third column, identify their race or ethnicity. In the fourth column, identify roughly their age if you don't know it exactly. Fifth column, sexual orientation. Yes. Sixth column, their level of education. High school, college, graduate level. Seventh column, their abilities or disabilities. You can just say yes, no in that column. To abilities or if they have disabilities, or if they're fully able, identify as fully able people. 6 was education. All right. 8th column is marital status. Married or single? What am I missing? Oh, sorry. Yep. We'll chalk that up to the person who created the PowerPoint. Yeah, no, I don't trust myself. Yeah, no. Well, only one person looked confused through that whole process. I'm wondering. All right, and then 9th column is income level. Lower class, middle class, upper class. All right. Now look at your list.
Seven.
Yes. Yes. So take a good look at your list. And which statement best reflects your trusted five? My trusted five are largely homogeneous. There's a small amount of diversity present. There's a moderate amount of diversity present. My trusted five are very diverse.
What do you consider the difference between small and moderate?
Yeah. So are there one or two things that you're identifying differently? Are there 4 to 5 things that you're identifying differently? They're very different. Yeah. All right. All right. Now, which 2 categories showed the most diversity? Gender. Yeah. All right. Anyone else? Age and education? Education and income level? Which 2 categories showed the least diversity? Age. Yeah. 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 So think about your least diverse categories. And then just ask yourself, how does that impact how I show up every day? How does that impact how I connect with other people? I heard just about from everyone, race was the primary in each response of least diverse. How does that impact how I make connections every day? Who I connect with? Because again, we're talking about trusted relationships here. How do I engage in someone? How do I engage with someone who's very different from me in a very deep, intimate conversation, whether it be about personal or the job? How do I engage in those conversations? So, what are some benefits of having a diverse social circle? Yeah. Yeah.
Say it again.
I think you have richer conversations.
Yeah.
One of the challenges that I feel like I face in the aspect of diversity circle is my environment as a whole. So depending on where you live geographically often affects your people to choose from and who to have connections and circles with. I mean, I came from a state originally that had a lot of diversity and I had more. I live in a state now where it has little diversity, so I have fewer. So I think it's really affected on your geographical location as well.
Actually, and our stage in life will impact all of these as well. When you're in high school and college, these answers might be very differently. When you're a seasoned 20-year employee at a particular organization, that may be very different. Your circles will be very different. Where you actually geographically live may impact, because of community, these things. And I would also say, if you're in a non-diverse, homogeneous community, what are the demographics of the people that show up in your courts every day? They may not be as homogeneous as the community that you live in. Yes. And so how do I relate to someone that I don't have a context for? How do I interact with an individual that I may not have staff members around that identify in that way? And I don't get to have the conversations about the diversity wheel with them that impacts me in a way that I have better appreciation and understanding for other people.
I would just add perspective. The more diverse the people that you are close with, the more diverse their perspectives. So their backgrounds, their experiences, the things that they've been through, and you can more readily identify that in people that come into your courthouse, for example. You may understand some of the challenges that they may be facing because they're similar to the people that are in your network, basically.
Excellent.
Thank you for sharing that. One thing that I think we have, one thing that I always like to say is be open to conversations. You know, offer people grace, get a conversation with a person that maybe you normally wouldn't talk to, even if it's just something small, elevator conversation. You know, I went to school, undergrad I have a bachelor's of business administration. And one of the things that they always taught us is have your elevator pitch ready. But you thought about that for the standpoint of having a job opportunity, but it also comes in handy when it just comes to meeting people, new people. I can't tell you how many people I've met at the courthouse on the elevator, and those relationships last over time, you know, just talking to different judges and people by even saying something as soon as they step, oh, no, that's a nice tire. Oh, the Eagles won, you know, go Birds. Anything to sort of have that small chat. I had to slide that in there. I'm from Philly. But anything to have that small chat, that small connection. It could be over something as simple as a cup of coffee just to enhance the exposure. Because it doesn't always have to be this deep conversation. Most relationships start off with just some kind of small talk and just getting to interact with people. Even conferences like this help. You know, you come, you speak to people, you have a good time, you may get a different perspective, exchange phone numbers. Some of the folks that you're in your groups with now, and you may have decided, okay, you work a similar job, or hey, let me connect with you. Maybe let me run this by you. I'm not saying that you have to do that, but this is one of those places that you can do it, because you never know. I do it all the time. I talk to people, I get emails. Call me sometimes if you have questions about, you know, any of these topics. I'm always looking forward to talking to them, but it doesn't have to be a DEI topic. It could just be something court related, because I think it's important for court professionals to connect in that way. And then sometimes this will happen as a natural result. You have more interactions with people that you may not have normally interacted with.
And if you're a hiring manager and you have a homogeneous, trusted five, Credell talked about affinity bias earlier. If the person coming in for the interview doesn't mimic you, you're most likely not going to see them as a trusted partner in doing the work. And so can that impact getting the most qualified person to hire? Because although the credentials look well, would they really be a good fit here? So think about expanding the areas of diversity in terms of your trusted circles, so that you are open to and embracing more identities than you may currently be aware of. And if you're not aware, that's the unconscious bias that we need to continually have conversations, because we all have bias. And we all have to work through those biases that impact us, because for some of us, there's no actual reason why those biases exist other than how we were socialized. And we have counteractive knowledge of people who don't fit into those biases that we have, but those biases still persist within us. Please.
So what I wanted to add to benefits, so I agree that it enhances your perspectives, but the takeaway from that is you can have a diverse circle, but if you're not willing to have those courageous conversations, it's sort of like useless. So if you're not able to speak your truth, you can have like a variety of people in your circle, but if you're not able to speak your truth or willing to speak your truth, it kind of diminishes the purpose of being diverse.
Yeah. So if you have a trusted relationship, you're more than likely going to have conversations about identity in those trusted relationships. And if you can have those conversations about identity in trusted relationships, it broadens your ability to have those conversations outside because you are informed in a way that you wouldn't be otherwise.
And I wanted to add one more point about the hiring process. If you find yourself on a hiring panel, I said on many hiring panels, sometimes you have to fight the urge to connect with people then and there. For example, if I see somebody, we went to the same undergrad institution, I've got a number of questions in my mind. You might be curious about, what teacher did you take? Oh, did you hang out on the yard? The interview is not the time to ask those questions. If that person is the best qualified for the job and they get the job, then those are questions and conversations that you can have later. It's not always a good idea to try to have all of that social interaction with one candidate, because then that next person that comes in, they didn't go to that same school. You're not going to have that same interview process, and you kind of prejudice the other party. So that's just one thing that I always am aware of when there is something that I have in common, is that I'm not going to just start examining that and exploring that during the interview process. I've seen individuals do it before, not particularly at my courthouse, but I never liked that idea, because I always feel like this person is getting a different interview. So we should always keep that in mind, have the conversation afterwards if they are hired.
Are these exercises that you think you could use in your courts? So the hope was in sharing them was that you take them back and actually use them, that you start the conversations, that you prepare. And you may not be able to do it across your entire system, but focus those conversations in places that will have the most impact. And as soon as people buy in and understand and appreciate that it's not about judgment, it's about reflection and perspective, they might be more openness to embracing in these dialogues as we need to have them, again, particularly today. We're on time, yes. All right, so thank you all for your time and attention. We really appreciate it. Again, I hope you can use these things in your work.
Do you have to rate the session?